person is sick, so I'm not sure exactly what the protocol is. Good evening. The hour of 6:30 PM having arrived, I will call to order this regular meeting of the Joint Planning Board and Planning Licenses and Development Committee. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. If you are in the audience tonight, you may access the agenda from any mobile device. Copies of the printed agendas are available in the wall pockets just as you enter the meeting room. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the homepage and subscribe to the city meetings email list. To the public and other board members, will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda items under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room and identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking. Will staff please conduct the roll?
For the PLD committee, Kate Bosley,
Present.
Mike Giacomo,
Here.
Phil Jones,
Here.
Gladys Johnson,
Here.
and Raleigh Omerad.
Present.
For the planning board, Pamela Russell Slack,
Present.
David Orgaz, George Hansel, Mike Remy, Emily Levine Bernier,
Here.
Harold Farrington, Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Here.
Armando Rangel,
Here.
and for alternates, Gail Summers, Randon Markelon, Tammy Adams, and Kenneth Cost.
Here.
And Madam Chair, for the planning board, in order to make quorum, I would recommend that you invite Mr. Cost to participate as a voting member tonight.
Yes, Mr. Cost will be able to vote tonight. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. So let's see, we have the second item on our agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the January 9th, 2023 meeting?
So moved.
I have a motion by Counselor Giacomo, a second by Counselor Ormerod. Are there any amendments or questions on the minutes? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous. The third item on our agenda tonight is a virtual presentation, the City of Keens Housing Need Assessment. The city's consultant, Camoin Associates, will present preliminary data and findings and discuss the project outreach efforts. More information about the Housing Needs Assessment project is available online at keennh.gov/community-development/housing. And Mary, do you want to get us started with Camoin?
Sure, Madam Chair. Tonight, we're joined by Dan Stevens and Jordan Bogie, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, from Camoin Associates. They're both here with us on Zoom, and I believe they are going to have a presentation that they should be able to show. So I guess Dan and Jordan, if you're able to turn on your video at this time and share your screen, that would be great. And I believe they're going to give you a brief introduction to their company and go through the housing needs analysis project and some of the data that they've been analyzing and looking at and some of the trends that they're seeing, and then start to discuss what their housing strategy, which is going to be the next step that they're going to be working on, what that's going to look like.
Okay.
So I guess Dan and Jordan, I'll turn it over to you.
Dan and Jordan, do we have you?
So they are on the Zoom. I'm not sure.
Can we see if they have their microphones muted? If you do, can you please unmute? Oh, I do see a change at the bottom there.
All right, so Dan or Jordan, can you hear us? I apologize, Madam Chair. They cannot hear us. I believe that's the problem. So I just got her. Oh,
Okay.
There you go.
Hi, Dan and Jordan, are you there?
We can hear you now. Yes.
Welcome
Hello.
to our meeting this evening. Mary Bruner from the city just gave you guys a nice introduction. Sorry, you couldn't
Wonderful.
hear her.
Yeah, no problem. So if it's all right, I have some slides that I can pull up and share with everyone.
Yes, please, go ahead.
With any luck, those are up on your big screen now.
Yes, we can see them.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be with you here tonight virtually. We're looking forward to sharing an update and overview of where we are with the city's housing needs assessment. It sounds like Mary just introduced us, but if you're not too familiar with us, Camoin Associates is an economic development and real estate consulting firm based out of Saratoga Springs. I'm Dan Stevens, director at Camoin. My colleague Jordan Bogie is joining me as well this evening. And we're just going to jump into it. So we have been busy over the past couple of months. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but there are many components to the research and analysis and strategy that we've been assembling, working closely with Mary and other staff. We have done quite a bit of data research. We've collected public input through a survey, and as some of you may know, we're in town for an open house recently. And we're now moving into phase 3, where we're taking all of that information, synthesizing it, and creating a housing strategy for the city moving forward. I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights of the data. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but some of the things, of course, that the data tells us, things around population, demographic changes, the economy, what wages and job trends in the city mean for housing needs. We've taken a close look at the existing housing stock and market trends as well. So we have cherry-picked a few things out of the data analysis to share with you this evening. Some of the things I think are a little bit more interesting and are starting to tell the story of the housing needs in the community. And so you see here, relatively small households compared to just about any geography you could pick on this chart. Part of that is college students, but even when you look at other age brackets, you do see kind of atypically small households, and that has a lot of implications, of course, for housing needs in the community. The high concentration of young adults, you see the college population there, but you also see kind of relatively lower levels in the, if you look to the age 60 to 64 bracket. So, in a lot of ways, the community lines up with others, but then there are some interesting kind of demographic differences. And of course, all of those things have implications for the housing that the community needs. We've taken a close look at jobs and commuting patterns, and that's what you're seeing here. So this is essentially a graphic saying that there's 12,000 some workers that are commuting into the city on a daily basis for employment, while about 5,500 are commuting out, and those 5,200 are living and working in Keene. Certainly, there's a lot of reasons why people live outside of the community, and, but a portion of those, are living outside the community because of housing availability and, not being able to find the right housing at the right price point. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the estimates that we've done looking at that data. Relatively old housing, you see the higher bars for the city, that tall blue bar to the left, the proportion of housing that's built in 1939 or previous or earlier. So, there's a lot of, issues around age of housing stock, housing condition, and quality that we're seeing in the city of Keene. Recent changes in remote working and in general working patterns have a lot of implications for the housing market and housing needs. And you see how the proportion of workers in the city working from home has jumped rather significantly between 2011 and 2021. Of course, the pandemic related impacts playing a huge role in that. Median home prices. So as part of our look at the housing market analysis in the city, we've gone and looked at these kind of price trends. So this would be the median sale price, pretty stable from 2016 to 2019. We get to 2020 and the onset of the pandemic and see relatively significant price hikes. You know, it's certainly something that a lot of places have been dealing with, and certainly in Keene, you've seen that dramatic rise in housing prices. So these are for sale prices, growing 45% over just this kind of past 3-year period. So when we start to look at affordability and look at those kind of affordability gaps between local households and income levels and price points, you know, this is a big story of the affordability issues in the community. A bit of a similar story with rents, and so this is charting apartment rents over the past 10 years or so. Not quite the same dramatic increase, but that is still a pretty significant increase, particularly you know, given the concentration of low income renters. You know, to go from a $1,200 per month apartment to a $1,500 a month apartment is a significant jump, and that's what we've seen in the city over the past couple of years. We've taken a look at short-term rentals. You know, it's always an important piece of understanding the housing issues. You see, these are active listings we can have, you know, we have data going back to about the fourth quarter of 2019, and that's what you're looking at here. So by quarter, relatively flat, growing a little bit, about 50 active short-term rentals in the community right now. A little under 30% of those are what we would consider full-time, right? They're primarily and solely being used as a short-term rental in the community. So I know that was pretty quick, but we'll certainly save some time for questions at the end. I'm going to let Jordan talk through some of the survey findings from the community survey that we had open a couple weeks ago.
Great, thanks, Dan. So yeah, we had a great response to the community survey, and that really speaks to the efforts of city staff and also the partners that were engaged throughout this process. We had 354 responses to the survey, so that was really positive. And you know, so this shows basically, you know, the demographics of folks who responded to the survey. Tended to be older. A little over half, 56% of respondents were age 55 or older, and kind of a spread across the income range, but the bulk of folks were between $45,000 and $135,000 of household income in terms of folks who responded. Also, it was a you know, in line with the demographics of Keene, it was a fairly white group overall who responded, with just a little bit overall otherwise. When we looked at the most challenging issues, housing issues for residents in Keene among survey respondents, the biggest issues were cost related. And so folks listed cost of property taxes, utilities, and the cost of rent and mortgage as the three biggest, with property taxes and utilities really being the biggest chunk among respondents. And so when we looked at, you know, how well among survey respondents housing was meeting their needs today and into the future, we found that, you know, a full 20% of respondents say that their housing is currently in need of major improvements or repairs. That's about 1 in 5 of folks who responded to this survey. And almost 2 in 5, 37%, say their current housing will not meet their needs over the next 10 years. And that can be for a variety of reasons why their housing might not meet their needs, if they're looking to grow their family or downsize, or if it is, an issue with the housing itself. We also found among respondents that over half, 54%, are what we would term cost burdened. So they're paying more than 30% of their household income on housing. And that is likely impacted also by the age of respondents overall. A lot of folks are likely to be on fixed incomes. And then we saw that 9% of respondents in the survey have had flood-related damage to their housing.
Thanks, Jordan. Certainly the survey results are very interesting, and I'm sure everyone will have the opportunity in the very near future to read through those full results. But as Jordan mentioned, it was a great response rate and some very interesting things coming out of that survey. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the analyses that we've done and some of the conclusions to this point. So we've looked at affordability, and when we do that, we really try to understand what the gap is. And one of the ways that we do that, and the gap being between what a typical household can afford and what housing prices actually are. And so that's what you're looking at here, is that kind of gap analysis. And so that 18,000, if you were to look at a typical household, and typical in this case would be median, that household would need that 18,000 in additional income to be able to afford a typical home to purchase. So, it tells a story pretty quickly. Even if you have a 2-earner household, and with some of the wages that we've looked at, it's still going to be a struggle for many households to be able to purchase that typical median priced home. And another way of looking at it, that 63,300, essentially the discount on the typical home price that a typical worker would need. So the home would need to be 63,000 cheaper for a typical median wage earner to be able to afford. And then lastly, that last figure at the bottom, $21 being the hourly wage that a hourly worker would essentially need to afford a typical rental unit. Right, and so there are quite a few jobs in the report. We've got all of those jobs and wages broken down. A lot of jobs don't have wages that pay $21. So again, it's indicative and illustrative of the housing gap, the affordability gap between what local workers and households are earning in terms of income and where housing prices are in the community right now. We've also done a quantitative analysis to determine, at the end of the day, all of this data that we've collected and all of the modeling, what is it telling us about the number of households that are in need? And in this case, when we're talking about need, we're talking about new, improved, or alternative living arrangements. So that can mean many different things. That does not necessarily mean that the city needs to build this number of new units. And we'll talk a little bit about the actual development need. But rather, these are the households that, for a variety of reasons, we'll touch on them in just a moment, are not in an ideal housing situation. And you see the 3,100 cost burden households is really driving the majority of that need. There is just a significant misalignment between income levels and housing price points, and a lot of households are spending considerably more on housing expenses than they should be. By that, as Jordan mentioned, that 30% threshold, 30% of income. Many households are spending much greater than that. And so, some of those households are what we would call severely cost burdened. But other categories of need that we've looked at, displaced worker households. So those workers that would prefer to live close to their place of employment, but cannot find housing, the right housing at the right price point. Future household growth, looking ahead 10 years to accommodate population growth. Those are the housing units that will be needed. Households in future obsolete housing. So over the next 10 years, portion of housing will become obsolete, will age, will deteriorate, and need to be replaced. And then we have the 59 households currently in substandard housing, in inadequate housing conditions. So we do have this broken down in very nuanced ways. This is by income level and homeowner households and renter households. Again, you see at the low income end of the spectrum is where you do have a lot of city households and residents that are cost burden falling into that category. But you do see across the income spectrum, there's housing need. Now, we've also done a separate analysis. So we've established the housing need by households that need some type of new or improved housing situation. In terms of the actual new housing units needed to be added to the city's housing stock, we've estimated that to be approximately 1,400 new housing units over the next 10 years. So average of 140 per year. To a certain extent, that new development's going to be needed to, put a meaningful dent in the housing need. Although, to accommodate the remainder of that need and address the remainder of that need is going to require policies and programs and other types of interventions. But you see, again, with the new housing, again, these are the new units that will need to be built. Really across the income and price point spectrum for both owner and renter occupied. So it's not just low income affordable housing. It's not only middle income workforce housing. It's market rate. It's really kind of across the board. I think one of the things moving forward will be, how does the city address creating housing, a variety of housing types and at a variety of price points. And then just quickly, we've talked a lot about data tonight, but in addition to the survey, some of the other more qualitative information we've gathered from stakeholders. We've talked with more than a dozen and more folks as part of this process, key stakeholders involved in the housing world and major employers as well. And you see some of the key themes that we've heard through these conversations. Again, we saw it in the data. We've heard about it from folks that we've talked with throughout the city and the region. The mismatch between incomes and housing costs, definitely one of the key themes and findings coming out of this study. The city, being an active partner to address some of these issues. Minimal room for new development, constrained. The city's relatively built out. Where is new housing going to go? It's going to take infill and densification and these types of strategies. The lack of housing definitely impacting employers. So there's real economic development constraints and implications of this kind of housing challenge. And then lastly, certainly opportunities for renovation of older housing stock, both rehabilitation and, better utilizing the housing stock that already exists in Keene. So I know that was very quick and high level, but we wanted to get everybody up to speed on kind of where we are in this process and some of the things that we've been learning along the way. We are down the home stretch now. We are in the process of putting the strategy piece together. And so that is something that we look forward to sharing with you at our next meeting. And I imagine you'll be seeing some of that beforehand as well. So we will be back to speak with you on April 10th. And then on April 20th, we do have a public open house event planned to share the results broadly with the community. So with that, I can probably stop sharing my screen, and we're happy to address any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you guys so much for that report. So during the next report out to us, will you be planning on bringing some ideas about policy change or what you think we might be able to do to impact some of these findings?
Yes, that's correct. And that's exactly where we are now, starting to flesh out exactly those kind of program and policy ideas. It's certainly one of those things where there's no silver bullet, not one or two things, but maybe 19 or 20 things to be thinking about when it comes to housing. So yes, we look forward to discussing those next time.
Okay, great. So I want to go back to the committee. Do I see anybody that has any questions for the consultants? Councilor Ormerod?
Thank you. I have a lot, but I'm going to limit myself here.
Well, we can get around to all of them, so.
Okay. One thing I noticed, you said that there were 54 active short-term rentals here. How is that based? Is that based on just MLS, or where did you get that data? Because I know MLS doesn't track everything.
Yeah, great question. It comes from a data source called AirDNA. It's a private data source. What that data source does, it scans active listing websites, particularly Airbnb and VRBO. And what it does is it collects that information and it distills it, synthesizes it, but it pulls it directly from scanning those websites.
Beautiful, thank you. That's a very, very good source. I also noticed that in your rentals and in your housing projections, what the needs were, there was quite a few, kind of a cliff at the top for rental units above 2,800, for example. And were those 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, or do you know what the sizing and what was kind of giving you the high-end rental needs?
Yeah, I can. So the first part of that question with the bedroom size, we haven't gotten into that level of granularity, at least at this point. And what's driving that would primarily be more kind of professionals. So we talked about some of the folks that are displaced out of the community, and that's also something that we've heard from the employers that we've talked to. So more modern, high-end housing stock, both on the rental and the single family side. So that is primarily what's going to be driving those kind of upper rental need figures.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilor Jones?
Thank you very much. Dan, are you familiar with what urban economists call SMSA, Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area, or SSA, sometimes they call it? And
Sure, yeah.
and that's looking at more than just the city. It's looking at what interacts with that city, whether it be economies, whether it be jobs, whether it be shopping, and housing is part of that. And I think if you look outside the outskirts of Keene and into other communities, some of those statistics would change.
Yeah, so when we look at a housing needs assessment like this, there's a couple things. One, you're absolutely right that the housing is something that, we try and think of regionally. The quantitative analysis in particular is focused on the city itself, right? And so it's designed to inform, you as decision makers and leaders, what the city needs to do, what the city should accommodate. And when we design these analyses, and it's kind of standard across housing needs assessments, right, we're not saying that the city has a responsibility to accommodate the housing needs of your neighbors, for example. Now, there is a little bit of an exception to that, because we do look regionally. We look at the labor shed when we look at things like commuting patterns. When you have folks that, let's say, quote unquote, should be living in the city, but are commuting from surrounding communities. Right, in essence, the city's kind of shifted the housing burden to those communities, and through the analysis, that's what we're attempting to model is, kind of bringing those workers back, recapturing those workers that have been displaced out of the community. So, in some respects, you're right, and the analysis is probably conservative in that we're not making a claim that the city should be meeting the needs of surrounding communities. We have tried to stay very closely focused on the city.
Yeah, thank you. I understand you were hired to look at the city, and that's what you did. But I think us as a body, we need to look more regionally also. Thank you.
Now, I just want to ask a quick question following up on what Councilor Jones said. Is it fair, have you guys done other assessments for cities in New Hampshire or for areas in New Hampshire?
This is our first assessment in New Hampshire. We've been over the border in Brattleboro recently. I think is probably our closest needs assessment.
Okay, and how is our community comparing to that current assessment, or are they still both ongoing?
That's been finished. I don't know if I can remember the numbers off the top of my head. I do think one of the things that strikes me so far is the proportion of cost-burdened households is relatively higher than we have seen in a lot of other communities. I don't think you're necessarily the highest, but that figure is something that stands out to me. In terms of, those displaced workers that I was talking about, I think you're probably a little bit on the high side from what we have seen. But again, I don't think you're the highest in terms of workers that can't find housing within the community. So I would say generally, your needs, kind of stacks probably in the top 25 percentile, if I had to guess off the top of my head, having done maybe 25 or 30 of these studies in recent years, if that helps kind of gauge where you stand.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I might get the answer to this question as we get the actual physical copy of the report, and I can look at your sourcing and stuff, but curious specifically about which items the data is coming off of the survey versus which data is coming out of the basically background data, for instance, the air DNA, or one of the, I see you did source that site out. The one I'm thinking about specifically is future obsolete. If you're saying my house is going to need work in 10 years, that I feel like is there a level of self-selecting in there where people say, oh yeah, my house could use some work in 10 years. I would be shocked if that number isn't quite high. So that's why I wasn't sure if that was something that you actually study, the age of house and condition of house based on an objective source, or whether it was based off the survey.
Yeah, for that particular analysis, we did not go off of the survey results. There's a couple things that go into that modeling, but we do look at actual age of housing in the community, and we've looked at tax assessment data, and there's some things that we pull out of there to help gauge condition and quality of housing. And then there are some other sources of data and assumptions that we pull in from research on kind of what's typical rate of obsolescence of housing in certain conditions and those kind of things.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone from the planning board? Yes. Kenneth,
Hi.
right?
Yes. Hi, thank you. There was one number that it was, I'm trying on memory now, 3,000 households are cost burdened, or something about around there?
Yes.
And how many households are there? That, or is that from the survey results? Or are there, I'm trying to get a percentage of what 3,000 means in our region of households.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Jordan has a precise figure. There's about 9,000 some. It's about 1/3, close to
That's-
1/3 of households being
That's what I was
cost
trying to
burdened.
get a sense of, that
Yeah.
magnitude of what that meant. Thank you.
Great question, thank you. Pam?
I just want to go back to what Councilor Jones had previously brought up about making sure that we don't only focus on Keene, but I think we need to focus regionally. I mean, I know that Swansea's looking at 400 brand-new housing units, which would impact this somehow. And the planning board has also passed some projects as well, with another one coming up within the next month. So I think it's important to look outside the box, meaning the box being Keene in the towns, because the towns are now talking about, different towns are within the region about including housing. The whole state is focused on this right now, so I think including them regionally, including this regionally in this report would be helpful for the board.
So it was my understanding, and Mary, I'm going to look over to you. Is it the Southwest Region Planning Commission that just did a housing study for the region?
Yes, so the Southwest Region Planning Commission and all of the regional planning commissions in the state are currently working on doing regional housing needs assessments. I haven't heard a date yet for when that will be completed.
Okay.
But they have a regional assessment that's being done, and then statewide, they've hired a couple of firms that are working on doing something called a fair share analysis. They're trying to look at, okay, how many housing units are needed statewide, and then break that down by town. And I haven't heard when that's going to be completed. I think it's going to be in the next couple months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be great to see if we can coordinate to get them to present for us too. Councilor Ormerod, yes.
Thank you. Just among the top lines you mentioned, I figure they're probably fair question. I remember, if I remember correctly, you said 54% of Keene households are paying, 30% or more of their household income. That number was like more than half. 54% were paying 30% or more of theirs. So they weren't quite burdened, but there was that. In that number, do you know how it splits between rental and mortgages and those who are paying for houses they own versus they're renting? Do you know how that splits up?
We have that in the report. I don't have it handy, but we do have that information and have it split up between renters and owners. I can tell you a greater percentage of renters are cost burdened compared to owners.
Yeah, Dan, I think I was able to pull this up here from our report, and it looks like that 54% was self-reported from the survey. We also have data coming out of the American Community Survey and the census, showing that 34% of all households in Keene are cost burdened, including 26.5% of owner-occupied households and just under 43% of renter households. So you're right, there is a difference there.
And do you have any data? I noticed in some of the slides, and I don't have the percentages written down, but there was a significant increase in the cost of home ownership. I think it was in the 45% dial range over the last 3 or 4 years, compared to about a 20% increase in the rental cost in that same time period. But do you have any data on any wage changes in the last 4 years? Because I do feel like there has been some adjustments to, like, there's sort of this donut hole happening where these prices all went up instantly and employers haven't caught up yet. But have we seen any shift where employers are starting to catch up with some wage increases?
Yeah, I know we do have the wage data. I don't have it at my fingertips, so maybe
That's
if
okay.
Jordan's able to find it quickly, but
And if you don't, that's fine. I think, when we meet again in April, like, if you can note down some of these questions, they would be great to
Yeah.
get answered.
yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else have any questions from the committee? All right, I'm not seeing any. Any closing comments from the staff?
Madam Chair, I would just note that as the consultants showed on that, I think it was the last slide or second to last slide, we do have, for next steps, they'll be back in April in person. So for folks who are interested in following along on this issue, there will be a presentation at that time where we'll start to dig into the actual strategies and possible solutions to explore. Then on April 20th, as they noted on their slide, there's going to be that open house. They're also going to be presenting that night to City Council.
Okay, great.
And that's when City Council would be accepting this report as informational.
Okay, great. All right, if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to let you guys go, and thank you so much for joining us tonight with this information. I think it's been great to see the process come along, and I'm looking forward to the recommendations.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We appreciate the time this evening.
Great.
Thanks all.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Take care.
So our next item on our agenda is our public workshop. So this is a public workshop for ordinance O-2023-02 relating to amendments to the rural district's minimum lot size. The petitioner, City of Keene Community Development Department, proposes to amend Section 3.1.2 of Article 3 of Chapter 100 Land Development Code, or the LDC, of the City Code of Ordinances to change the minimum lot size of the rural district from 5 acres to 2 acres. I want to get started on our public workshop for tonight by letting everybody know that we are going to limit public comment to 3 minutes per person. There will be a reminder by Councilor Giacomo with 30 seconds left to offer the speaker a moment to wrap up their thoughts. I'm not going to tolerate any negative language that's disrespectful to our committee members, our neighbors, our fellow neighbors, or our staff this evening. So please keep your comments limited to your perspective on the topic at hand. And I think we have Jesse here to start our presentation.
Good evening, Jesse Rounds, Community Development Director, and I'm joined by,
Dan Langell, City Assessor.
Great, welcome, guys.
and I'm just gonna try to move quickly through this presentation. Dan has some slides at the end. Not that his are less important, they're just, that's where it lands.
More important.
More important, definitely. So I will try and go through, just want to give an overview. I know this has been before you before, so there will be some repetition of that. So just basically the change here is we are proposing to change the minimum lot size in the rural district from 5 acres to 2 acres. That's it. No changes to any other dimensional standards for the rural district. Here's just a quick map of the rural district. This is all the parcels regardless of size. And you can see there are, it's sort of amongst the rural district, there are cutouts. Those are either public land or are the conservation district. But generally, the rural district is the area around the outside of the city. So just a quick review of the parcel sizes. These are broken down in a lot of different ways, but just wanted to show you where the parcel sizes lie in terms of size. And just wanted to, this is a quick slide that shows all of the, in fact, I think this might be in the wrong spot. I meant to put it somewhere else. But this is the rural district with all of the landlocked parcels removed, with prohibitive slopes removed, and with wetlands removed. So basically showing you the development potential remaining in the rural district.
I'm
Yep.
sorry, Jesse, can we go back one slide and then back forward, just so I can see the
Sure.
comparison?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry,
Oh.
one more.
I don't have oh, yeah, sorry, yes, of course.
Okay, and then,
And then I'll skip forward too.
okay, great, thank you.
All right. So we received a lot of public comments when last we presented this, and I sort of broke them down into 5 different categories, and I want to talk about each of them in order and sort of what we have tried to address, or what we've tried to do to address some of those concerns and what we see. And I think the housing needs assessment provided some background for this as well. So, in terms of impacts to rural character, there were a lot of concerns that additional development, so changing the lot size would increase development along the main roads in the rural district and would change the feel of the rural district. And the first thing we did after that was to look at the land development code. Are there things in the land development code that allow the planning board to protect that rural character? And in fact, there are, and we actually worked with, our staff worked with the planning board to highlight those changes. That some were changes, some were just highlighting powers they already had to control where a house could be on a property, how a subdivision would look, things like a no-cut buffer along a road, meaning that as you drive down the road, it still feels like that treed landscape right along the road, and you don't see the development. So just trying to reinforce that rural character, because we recognize that's the point of the rural district, is to have that rural character. There are also current conservation easements, more than 1,000 acres of conservation easements in the rural district. And so that's permanently conserved land, will not ever be developed. And then I did also want to mention existing tax protections. There are current use properties, these are properties of 10 acres or greater, that have development restrictions on them. Those can be removed, but they are a tool that residents can use to protect the rural character of the rural district. And then the subdivision regulations, again, that's I guess I should have highlighted that later, but that changes and those powers that the planning board has that I wanted to highlight. So in terms of unwanted densification, this was another comment that we received, that we would see more density in a part of the city where we don't need density, we actually need density downtown, and both the master plan and the LDC call for that densification downtown. We believe that, first of all, there are opportunities for that densification downtown, so that's happening. But then on top of that, again, we have controls in the land development code to separate houses, to increase the distance, and I'll go into some examples of that in a moment. But then there's also the larger existing lots. There are already large lots in the district that are going to spread that around, and you're not going to see the densification across the entire landscape. And so here are a couple examples, and these, I cannot claim authorship of these drawings. Our colleague Evan put these together, but what these looked at were, okay, so you have a parcel, 4-acre parcel, sorry, larger than a 4-acre parcel, but I think this was originally for the CRDs, so it could be smaller. Acreage doesn't matter. What we're looking at here is what the distances between driveways would have to be and how a development could look in the rural district and how it would look from the road. So you have, like we said, 50 feet between, so your frontage has to be at least 50 feet to develop it. And then on top of that, your house front, at the front of your house, has to be 200 feet from side to side of your parcel. So that really changes where, like the regularity of driveways on your, as you drive along. There was another example there, I'm sorry. I'll see if I can grab it at the end of the presentation. The next concern was misplaced development. And this is, again, that question of why are we putting development in the rural district? Why can't it happen in the higher density parts of the city? And I think there are a couple answers to that. One is we are actually encouraging that densification in other parts of the city already. The planning board and the city council approved changes to the LDC that would allow for residential development above commercial development in the commerce district, and increased densification downtown that would address some of that. We also encourage accessory dwelling units. So that's another tool that residents can use to minimize densification if they so choose. I already mentioned the mixed-use development. And then I think the point here is that these are single-family homes. We're not talking about multifamily housing. This is single-family homes, which is the pattern of development that already exists in the rural district, just being repeated, and addressing the reality that there are currently 58% of the lots in the rural district are smaller than 5 acres, and so are technically you would need a variance to develop them if they're vacant. And what this would do is free up additional acreage, lowering a barrier to development that would then allow more people access to a style of development that we support. So I think this is not misplaced development. This is a development pattern that already exists that we want to promote. And then environmental impact. And you know, the concern here is development has an impact on the environment. We absolutely agree with that. And that's why we have existing environmental regulations. The city of Keene has a surface water protection conditional use permit that really limits the ability of people to impact surface waters. Has steep slopes protections. And those really act to limit the areas you can develop. The state has similar regulations. In fact, they also won't allow development outside of, you know, if you don't have a sewer connection, if you can't support a septic system, you cannot develop on your property. So these are distinct regulations that limit development in the rural district. In terms of restrictions on development, we have the subdivision regulations. We also have the current use rules, as well as conservation easements. Any homeowner could seek a conservation easement on their parcel. It is a private action that the city isn't involved in at all, that would allow people to protect acreage in the rural district. So I think what we're trying to say is that not only is the city taking on efforts to protect the environment across the city, but specifically in the rural district, but there are opportunities for residents to do the same. This is just another way of looking at that map, highlights the surface waters and the steep slopes regulations, again, overlaid on the rural district.
So
Yep,
can we
sorry.
just look at that
Yeah,
really quickly?
absolutely.
So the orange on here, or that's how I see it,
Yep,
are those steep slopes?
yep, mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we've
And
got
then
the
the blue outline.
waterways. Okay.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I'm gonna pass this off to Dan mostly, but I do want to mention that as part of the analysis, if we go back, I might have the slide here. There are, so this list is broken down to show parcels that will be affected by this change. And we ran the numbers, so you don't have to. And the parcels between 4 acres and 9.9999 acres are the ones that are going to be impacted by any sort of tax implications of being able to be subdivided. And Dan will go into the details of that, but I think it's important to note that those parcels, that's less than 20% of the parcels in the rural district are going to be impacted by any potential tax increase or tax change. The majority of the parcels are either smaller than 4 acres and thus cannot be subdivided, or are larger than 10 acres and can be protected through various methods from that tax implication. And then I guess I just wanted to highlight the benefits, not just try to address the concerns that people had, but we want to allow housing development on a continuum, from apartments for rent, single, studios, all the way up to large, single-family homes. We want to be able to have people move into the house they want. And so that's what allowing additional density or additional development in the rural district could afford. We want to permit property owners to take advantage of additional unused acres. Right now, if you have 5 acres you can't subdivide, under our proposed regulations, you could subdivide, and that's an opportunity to realize benefits from your property that you cannot now. And then just recognizing that any development will need to be sensitive to those steep slopes, those surface water restrictions, and then any habitat, the subdivision regulations that the planning board reviews do have they have the power to look at some of those environmental impacts through that. So with that, I think, just a repeat of the housing needs analysis. Again, and I will highlight the 4,500 households. That's a large number, but it's also a pretty large number of things, including cost-burdened households that are in substandard housing, that sort of thing. That's a lot of people in housing that doesn't match their needs. And then the 1,400 new units, they flashed up a graph there that showed that over 300 of those 1,400 new units are in the more than $300,000 range. Those are single-family homes, and those are in the rural district, and that's, so there's a need there. But again, I would just reiterate, that housing needs assessment really showed we need housing across the entire spectrum for all of our workers, for all of our community. With that, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, so good evening. Once again, I'm Dan Landry, I'm the city assessor. So I have a few slides to kind of go over some of the concerns and questions that I've been getting, just to kind of give you the perspective from the assessing and evaluation side of things. So I got a couple examples I want to go over just to kind of show you what we could be looking at, and then at the end discuss, what the value changes could possibly be. So first of all, kind of why we have to do this, what my responsibility is regarding the zoning change is, first of all, these are state laws that I have to follow. The first one's 75-1. I have to tax all property at its market value. Market values, typically that's determined by what buyers and sellers are paying for their property. It's nothing that I'm necessarily coming up with. I'm analyzing what is being done in the market, and then we take that and we apply that to every house in the city, and that's how your assessments are determined. Most common thing I often hear is, what if I don't plan to sell my home? I love my home. I love where I live. We still have to come up with a value for that property. And again, we're using what the market is doing and applying that value to the market. The second part of this is, annually, I have to adjust assessments to reflect changes. Typically, people understand that as, building permits. You put a garage on your property, and we have to add some value to your property for that. But if you look at number C, specifically, it's also for things for properties that have undergone zoning changes. And that's really what we're focusing on here tonight, is the potential zoning changes that this could be occurring. So we've been talking a lot about, subdividing parcels, and this is just kind of a very basic example. It's a perfect situation to kind of get everyone looking at what the market could be for properties and their subdivision potential. So obviously this is a perfect street, nice and straight, everything's nice and rectangular. You're not gonna find too many of these in Keene, but hopefully this will get us all thinking on the same lines. You see you have 3 of these parcels that sold for $50,000 each. So if you guys are all selling me property, you have a 4-acre parcel. Now keep in mind, it's one parcel. Is anyone here gonna sell that to me for $50,000? If so, let me know, take your number. You may not double that, but you're gonna ask for additional value for that, because you recognize that you could subdivide that and sell it for more, or that I could come in and do that. Same as with 6 acres. Now you have 3 acres that you could possibly be doing that with. So the point is that you have to recognize, well, from my perspective, I have to recognize the market value, the market potential in these properties. So when I'm looking at an assessment, this is what I have to look at. And even though this is a kind of a hypothetical example, this does happen in Keene. If you look at the new houses that are being built on Old Walpole Road, for example, that was actually purchased as one large parcel. When they purchased it, they then subdivided it, and now it's being developed into housing. But that was purchased for a lot more than what one building lot would actually go for. Next, I kind of want to give you a breakdown, and this will make more sense as we go over the valuation portion a little bit, of how we look at and how we assess land. There's this example at the bottom of this of a 7-acre parcel, so I'll kind of use that as an example. So the first thing we look at is what the primary site is of a lot. And this is really goes with the zoning requirements. So right now, if you have 5-acre zoning, your primary site is 5 acres. With the zoning change, that goes to a 2-acre primary site. And really, what is most of your value in land is in the development potential of the property. If you can develop it, people are going to pay most of their money for that part of the parcel. What we also consider is the secondary site. This is kind of what we just went over. This is acreage that supports the subdivision potential of a property. So again, if you have a 7-acre parcel right now in the rural zone, you have no additional option to subdivide that property, so there's no additional value. With the 2-acre zoning, you could potentially have 2 additional sites, so that's 4 additional acres that go into a secondary site value. And then finally, we have what we call residual or excess land. This is the land that's above and beyond what's required for development. Sometimes it's a yard, woods, backyard, but there's really no development use for that property, but we do still value it because there's still, some value for that. So again, if a 7-acre parcel right now, 5 acres is the primary site, that's 2 acres would be residual land. With the zoning change, it goes 2, 4, then we have that 1-acre residual land. So this is more of a practical look at what this could actually look like. So the light blue kind of purplish lot you guys are all looking at, these are all 5-acre lots. So if this goes to 2-acre zoning, because of where that house is located, you could see how you could easily subdivide that and add another house there. So we would consider this a subdividable potential lot. So we have 2 acres of primary land, 2 acres of your secondary site, and 1 acre of residual land. So there could be an added impact on this parcel because of the potential to subdivide that. But we have to look at all the conditions of the properties, because not everything can be subdivided just because of the acreage. So if you look at the next one, which is that goldish color, again, that's a 5-acre lot. You'd think, well, I can get 2 acres out of that. Well, because of where that house is situated, it's very unlikely that you could actually subdivide that. So we're not going to assess that with a subdivision potential. We still value the land at its market value, but no additional value for its subdivision potential. The green one there, again, 6 acres. You think, well, I can get 3 acres out of that. Well, because of the road frontage, the shape of that, there really isn't a whole lot of subdivision potential there, so most likely you're getting 1 parcel out of there. The 2-acre lot, which was unbuildable, is now going to be a buildable lot. And finally, the last, like the grayish parcel, you have a large 7-acre parcel, lots of frontage, looks like you can get a lot of different lots in it. But because of the wetlands, you really can't develop that a whole lot. You'd be lucky to get 1 house on there. The point being is we're going to have to go parcel by parcel throughout the rural district and figure out which parcels can actually be subdivided versus which ones can't. We're not going to just take a look at acreage and make determinations on value based on acreage alone. things like topography, wetlands, where the houses are located now are all gonna come into play. So this is a hypothetical value demonstration. I want to make that very clear that I'm not predicting at this point what the values will be, but this is kind of using some current information and applying it, just as an example. So right now, your average 5-acre lot is about $65,000. Your average 2-acre lot is about $45,000, and we value residual land about $5,000 per acre. So a 5-acre lot now in a rural district would be $65,000. With the zoning change, you could see an increase up to $85,000. How we look at that is we take a look again, primary site, it's no longer what it is now, but it's gonna be $45,000, because that's what 2 acres goes for. And then we're gonna value that secondary site. Now, sometimes there's a cost to subdivide a property, you have to get, surveys, there's a lot that can go into it, so someone may not pay you the full potential of maybe the double that value, so we're gonna have to account for that. So that's why I put 80% here, so 35% would go to that second lot. And then you have a residual acre of 5 acres, so that's how we come up with the 85,000 in this example. And then just finally, even if this were to pass next week, it's not automatically gonna change. I'm not gonna be doubling any values, anything like that. It's gonna require a lot of work, a lot of time from our department to again, go parcel by parcel to see what the potential is, to look at what is the market doing. I can't predict future value, I'd be a very rich man if I could, but we have to wait and see. Typically when we're doing a revaluation, we want anywhere from 1 to 2 years worth of sales to kind of set our valuations based off of. So we're gonna wanna see some good solid sale information before we're reassessing the parcels in the rural zone. And there's two components of that. One is the subdivision potential, which we've been talking about, but the other is what's the overall effect on the rural zone? There could be downward pressure on the market because people are used to a certain way of the rural zone being, and now it's something different than what they were expecting. So will those things balance out? I don't know that. That's what we're gonna be looking for, though. We take everything into consideration, not just subdivision potential, but any negatives or positives resulting from the zoning change. And then finally, we're talking a lot about land, but land's really only 20% of the value of a parcel. 80% of that is the building. So we're really only talking about a small portion of the overall value that's gonna be affected.
Thanks, Dan. And that is the end of the presentation. Any questions? Happy to answer.
Yes, lots of questions.
Excellent.
And so don't go anywhere. And just a second, we'll get to the public after we talk to the committee. So I might want some slides
Yes,
back.
can do that.
So I've written down a bunch of notes, and I'm just gonna go to Dan for a minute because you just finished. But you had said that you're gonna look at the potential properties in the rural district that could have a subdivision. So I think that Jesse had showed us the area, and I just want to point this out again, that we're really talking about lots that are going to be between 4 and 10 acres. Because the current use rule, and can we go over what the current use rule is?
Yep.
Is it your housing lot and then 10 acres, or is it 10 acres gives you the ability to put property into current use?
So you have to have 10 acres that's in its natural state. So your primary house is excluded, so you have to have the 10 additional acres.
Okay,
for it to be
so
current
does
use.
your primary house have to be, do you take out the zoning requirement for a lot?
No,
Or does
so-
it just the area that's developed?
So in a current use situation is we're literally only keeping out the part that's actually developed.
Okay.
So even though it's a 5-acre zone, you may only be using 1 or 2 acres for the development purposes.
Okay.
So that's the part that's out of current use that we put its, current market value on. The rest of that is eligible for current use under the current use law.
Okay, and so if you have any tax adjustments for folks who might be impacted by this change if it went through, or who currently have this type of assessment on their property because they don't have their property in current use. Does the assessing department educate them
So if they have the potential,
if they have potential for that?
yeah, often. Someone comes in saying, my taxes are too high, what can I do? We're gonna go over what kind of exemptions or credits they may be eligible for. We're gonna take a look at their parcel, make sure it's correct, the valuation, and, if there's the possibility for current use, yeah, we give them everything that, we can so they can make the best decision possible for themselves.
Okay, and so I believe on our list of housing acreage lots when we looked at acreage, there was about 219 lots that would potentially be affected from a tax perspective if this were to go through. And so out of those 219 lots, I have to imagine that a lot of them have constraints like the driveway, road frontage, wetlands, other issues going on. So each of those lots will have all of the negative potential impacts assessed by your department before any changes are made.
That's correct.
And will the homeowners have an opportunity to file for an abatement or anything if they disagree with your findings?
Yep, so anyone has the right to file for an abatement any year after their final tax bill before March 1st. My thought would be that this would probably be rolled into as part of our next revaluation, where we're revaluing the entire city anyway. There's a lot of changes that go on that affect market value, this being one of them. So we usually give people notice prior to that to come to a public hearing and go over their value and make sure they're comfortable with what we're projecting at that time.
Okay, great. So does anyone else have any questions for Dan while we're, okay, Counselor Giacomo?
Thank you. Yeah, one for Dan and
A bunch for
two I'll
Jesse.
hold on. The one question I did have is, in the assessment, is the ability of a subdivided parcel to put in a septic, would that make it, obviously it would make it unsubdividable, but do you go into that level of detail when you'd be going through to see if a second lot could be built out of it?
That's a good question. If you're looking at 2-acre zoning, you're assuming in that 2 acres that you can build a house, septic, well, all that fits into that 2 acres. Again, if someone had a very large property now and where their septic is located, that you couldn't subdivide it, we'd take that into consideration.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking,
So-
for instance, that 5-acre parcel in blue there.
Yep.
If there was a wetland up in the top, the top corner there, wetlands obviously have a buffer off of it that you're not allowed to put a septic. You would be able to fit a house in there, though, if that was in the 1 acre, whatever the extra acreage.
Right.
You would be able to technically subdivide it, fit a house legally and a driveway legally with the 2-acre zoning, but it might preclude them from being able to actually install a septic, so you really couldn't subdivide it still. So I guess I'm just, I know that your job is going to be complicated enough should
Right.
this move through, but I do curious as we get into that.
I'm not a septic designer, so yeah, we're not gonna go to that level.
Okay.
But I think we are looking for reassurances
Yeah.
that you are going to jump through every hoop in order to protect the folks.
Certainly,
Right.
and some of this, we need information, it's give and take, we need information from the taxpayer as well. It's like, from my perspective, that looks like that's a perfectly subdividable lot, there's no topography, no wetlands, has frontage, 2 acres, meets all the requirements. If they come in and say, well, look, because of where my septic's located, I can't really realistically get a septic in there, like, okay, that's, we understand that, and then we would adjust the assessment, at that time. So we're gonna do our due diligence, everything that we can. We also recognize that this is a relationship, like all of our values are, with the taxpayer, and we need them to provide information to us as well.
That's fair, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Ken?
Thank you. A little bit following up on that question, thank you. It seems that if the zoning allows a site to be subdivided, but now we just talked about a lot of other things that would make it not subdividable, and we won't know that until, say, a landowner hires a land engineer and they start to look at it. They look at maybe the underlying, maybe it's a lot of rocks that need blasting, or just an amazing amount of clearing and grubbing, or other things, some, stabilization, other engineering that would make subdividing just not feasible. You couldn't get your money out of building a house. So just to say, because you could divide it, it's now has more value, you really don't know that, and the perk test and everything else, until all of that is done. So how does a landowner, how does he know he has that value? How do you know he has that value without actually doing some preliminary engineering?
So, I mean, again, we're not able to go to that level. We are gonna look at topography, we are gonna look at wetlands, we have that available in our, GIS system. We're gonna look at road frontage, we're gonna look at acreage, we're gonna look at the general topography and how other houses are situated in that area. And from there, we're gonna make our estimation based on that. If someone comes back to us and provides additional information that, we can't see, and we do this today. I mean, I value a 5-acre parcel saying that has development potential. It may not. But again, if someone can show that it doesn't, then we would adjust our assessment now. It's gonna be the same way.
Counselor Johnson?
Thank you kindly. I appreciate your work, both of you. The question that I have, and it might show my ignorance, but if you end up with these 2 homes on a lot, thank you, sorry. If we end up with 2 homes on a lot, but there's only room for 1 septic, can they share a septic? How does that work?
I'm more for that one to Jesse.
It's a great question, and my understanding is that they can share a septic. They can have an agreement to share the septic.
They have to be large enough to.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Thank
They have to
you.
meet all those
I
regulations.
guess it was an okay question.
All right, anyone else from the committee? Yes. Emma.
This is for Dan, I guess. Tax-wise, just numbers, so I think I could look up current tax rate of Keene and like crunch some numbers, but
Sure.
just in general, because you showed 65,000 versus 85,000,
Yep.
what would that tax increase be? And then I could kind of multiply what people would be looking at.
So 20,000 increase, tax rate's about $31, so it's about $620.
Thanks.
620. Counselor Ormerod?
I had a question for Jesse. Are we at that time yet?
Do
Or
we
is
have
it
any
still
more
Dan?
tax questions?
We asked just Tim to repeat those numbers, it was tough to hear it back.
Sure, I can do that for you as well, because I have it written down. So the difference on the slide, I don't know if we can pull it up really quick, with the example that was shown, the property that it changed, yep, that's the one. So the change in the zoning went from $65,000 of land value to $85,000 of land value, which increased the property $20,000 worth of value. At the city's tax rate of approximately $31 per thousand, gives you a $620 tax increase per year.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, Counselor Ormerod?
Yes, this is a question for Jesse.
Yes,
and-
I think we've got most of our tax questions answered.
And maybe we don't know yet, but hopefully we have a guess. If we go from 5-acre to 2-acre possibility, how many more households can we accommodate? Right? I mean, since we kind of know how many we need, how far will it get us?
I don't know if I can answer that question. However, what I would say to sort of get there is going back to, and I don't have this number, but what I will say is that right now, below, in terms of properties under 5 acres, a number of those, and again, I don't have the number in front of me, but I can get it for you, are vacant now. And they could now be developed without going through a variance. So that suddenly makes those much more accessible in terms of development. And then in terms of subdivided, since subdivision is a purely personal, homeowner, property owner decision, it's really hard to say. And I don't know if we could come up with a number that would estimate the number of additional lots that would happen in the rural district.
I'm just gonna say, then why are we doing it? Okay? I mean, it's a tough question.
Yeah, I can
And
absolutely
so I
answer
would
that.
like to know why we're doing it if we don't know what the benefit's gonna be to solve our problem.
We can't know whenever we make a zoning change how many new of anything. We don't make those market decisions of private property owners. What we do is make an environment in which private property owners can make the best decisions for their property.
All right, I would like to see the numbers, so at least we could make our own assumptions and
Sure.
make better decisions on that, that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mary Berner?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Mary Brenner, Senior Planner. I just wanted to add to this discussion. I think Jesse Renz is correct that we can't do a build-out scenario just because you pretty much have to go into the detail of getting the engineering done on a property to know if it can actually be developed. There's a lot of constraints in the rural district. I can't tell you how many times somebody has come in, they wanted to do a subdivision in the rural district. We go partway through the process and then they realize that it's just not feasible because of development constraints on the property. So it's really hard for us to predict. However, there are a number of lots where they could maybe subdivide and get 2 lots or 3 lots. So what we're really expecting to happen with this change is smaller subdivisions to be able to come through. So maybe a property owner who has a 9-acre lot can divide it into 2, maybe 3 lots. Probably they're not gonna be able to maximize the number of units on it just because of the constraints in that district. And we do see a lot of pent-up demand for that. We get a lot of inquiries. And right now, we don't have very much land outside of the rural district where new single-family homes can be built. So we really see the rural district as the last area in Keene where there's buildable land for single-family home development. Everywhere else, we're looking at more infill-style development where we're converting single-family to 2-family or 3-family, or upgrading or densifying lots and having higher density homes, talking about small multifamily or multifamily. There's not a lot of space left in Keene to do single-family home development. And so that's the reason why we're looking at the rural district. Again, we can't say how many new homes would be developed. That's just a gargantuan task that we can't undertake, but we do think would be a pretty modest amount given the constraints in the district from, again, we've been talking about wetlands, but our surface water protection ordinance also protects streams and vernal pools. Once you factor all of those in, it really restricts, and that data is not shown on that map that we showed you because we don't have that data mapped out citywide. That's going to be done individually for each individual lot. They have to hire a certified wetland scientist to go out and find all of those areas and map them. Those are not shown on that map that shows the development constraints that was up on the screen. That's just the wetlands that we have mapped citywide. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mary.
I'll stop there.
Well, and Counselor, I'd also like to point out that as an example, we chose to increase the opportunity to provide residential in the Commerce District. And we also increased the number of floors that housing downtown can be built to, I think, to 7 stories now. But under no circumstances can we tell any of these people that they have to do that. So, I think that that's always going to be the rub, is we're looking at what the housing needs are, and we're trying to create an environment for some of these things to maybe happen, but we can't, the city doesn't own any of this land, and we can't push any development, but we can just hopefully encourage, an environment where development can happen. Yes, Counselor.
Yeah, so I understand we can't do a very accurate engineering build-out analysis. I understand that, but I think there's probably gonna be about 50 people in this city that are gonna do their own build-out analysis and come to us and tell us, this is what the potential, this is what it could mean. I would just rather have it be done accurately, or at least estimated what the actual help would be. That's all, just, what the potential is. Because I want to see how close we're going to get to solving the big problem
Right.
of getting people here. So maybe the build-out analysis is not the right tool, but I would like to see if there's something that we can do to say, yeah, this is really worth doing because this is what it's going to give us in terms of the numbers. That's all. Thank you.
Well, and maybe there is a potential to look at a range, but I think that we'd have to look at a very conservative and a liberal version of what that range could be. Counselor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think building off of what Raleigh's saying, I think something that might be helpful is just getting a distribution, basically this chart right here, except the number of vacant lots. Because obviously having a lot, especially 2 to 5 acres, that lot now being buildable without variances that's probably the lowest hurdle to clear. I would expect those properties, if they are indeed buildable from an environmental perspective, I would expect that to be the low-hanging fruit for someone to develop. Going through the effort of subdividing engineering plans for subdivision, all that is going to be a lot more complicated. So if we knew the number of vacant parcels for each of those, there would probably be some good data to get, and that's something that you guys should have. Put Will to work, but.
It's a combination of Will and Dan, actually,
And
to
Dan.
get that answer.
So, but my question was regarding that map, the one that was sifted to have all the steep slopes in there and wetlands, slide 3, I believe.
Yeah.
Does that contain current use as well as in conservation?
It does not, and I
Okay.
purposefully didn't include that because that's not a permanent
Right.
restriction. I will say, though, that of the 13,000 acres in the rural district, currently 10,000 of those acres are in current use.
That's why I asked that question.
Thank you.
I was relatively familiar with that number, and
Can you just repeat that for me?
Of the 13,000 acres in the rural district, that's approximately, it's a little bit more than that. There are more than 10,000 acres in current use.
So it leaves us 3,000 acres,
Yeah.
but a lot of that already have home sites.
Yep, have homes or have these restraints on them.
Do we know how many home sites there are in the rural district currently?
We could probably get that number. I don't have it in front of me, but I can absolutely get it.
Jesse, perhaps you could explain what current use is for some people that might not know,
Dan, do you want to explain current use? Sure. Thank you.
and the benefits or non-benefits of having current use.
Yep. So current use is when you own 10 or more acres and you leave it in its natural state. Either it can be farmland, forest land, it could even be wetlands. And the benefit of that is that you agree that you're not going to develop it, and there's a tax benefit, so
Exactly.
yeah, significant tax benefit.
Thank
So
you.
instead of paying thousands of dollars per acre, you literally could be paying hundreds of dollars per acre.
if I continue the rest of where I was getting
Yes.
with that was then, because current use, the reason that current use exists, and please feel free to correct me here, is that when it is taken out of current use, there are a whole bunch of, not back taxes in the bad sense, but there's a whole bunch of taxes that need to be paid. Those taxes go directly to creating additional conservation land. Is that not correct?
So you're partially correct. So
Okay.
we don't pay back taxes. You pay a one-time penalty,
Yeah.
10% of the value of the land that comes out at that time. And that land, the city has elected to put that towards the conservation fund. The city council's elected to do
So we're
that.
taking land out of current use. If land is taken out of current use, it goes directly towards putting more land into permanent conservation then.
Correct.
Pam?
How often is land taken out of current use and put into conservation? How often does,
I've been here about 10 years, and I maybe see one a year, if that.
thank you.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the committee for the staff? We're going to get there. Okay. So that was great, guys. Thank you so much for that information. There might be more questions once we get through some of the public comment. So if you guys can just stand by for a little while.
I just have to.
Oh, yes.
I want to thank you both because this is my third time around with this. And I really appreciate all the work you've done and all the questions that you've answered because we keep coming back. So hopefully we can come to a decision between the two committees tonight of how to move forward. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Mary, you too.
Yes. So while this is not a formal public hearing, I'd like to invite members of the public to offer comments and questions on the proposed ordinance. If you want to speak tonight, please come to one of the microphones in the room and state your name and address for the minute taker. And we're going to start by trying to keep comments to 3 minutes. And we are going to have them timed. So do we have anybody who would like to speak to us? Yes, sir. Come on up. Just make sure your microphone is on. I see one is and one is not. And state your name and address for the minute taker, please.
Matthew Hall, 431 Hurricane Road. Mr. Rounds said that the only change tonight was 5 acres to 2 acres, and yet I hear something about 50-foot road frontage. Just
Yes.
His time, not mine.
So, yeah, that's absolutely that is the current road frontage requirement, and that would be the road frontage requirement going forward.
It's currently 50. Okay. We're here tonight in an attempt to remedy a national housing problem with our local actions. It's laudable. But I think you have to be careful about creating a hardship for people that have 4, 5, 6 acres, whatever. If they have to go and hire engineering to defend a mistaken development potential. Because I understand that the wetlands and steep slopes are not studied at the granularity necessary to go individual house lots. And shifting the burden from one group of people to another group of people is not a step forward. It's just masking a problem. And very informative discussion here. Burdened households, smaller households, large existing house stock. And you're going to add, in some cases, another burden of either more taxes or having to hire someone to show that indeed this additional land may not be developable. So the last thing I would like to say is, or question is, are other comments and letters from the public about the 5 to 2 acre zoning change in a rural district that were presented as part of O 2022-19-A and B going to be included in the record for O-2023-2 or O2? And if not, I would like to request that those letters and comments be included or referenced by the Joint Planning Board and Planning License Development Committee in the record today as part of O-2023-2, because there's no need for us to rehash something we've already had. But if we're going to be looking at this, and we've had previous comment, as was stated before, 3 times in some cases, there's no need to rehash that.
You have 30 seconds remaining, Matthew.
Okay, thank you. Last thing is, yes, current use, which I don't have any current use in Keene, does have low tax rates. However, it has considerably lower burden on the town. Some is not even accessible from the private road, and they don't send kids to school with it, and they don't demand much fire truck use, a lot fewer demands on the public sector.
If you could finish up your comments, 3 minutes is up. Sorry, I don't mean to be the rude one. It's my job tonight.
It's a challenge for me.
Well, and it's a challenge for me to keep track and to be paying attention, so Counselor Giacomo is going to do a great job helping out.
Thank you, Matthew.
I'm glad it's him.
All right, do we have anyone else? Yes, come forward.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Pamela Parrish. I live at 123 Meadow Road, and I'm active with the Monadnock Interfaith Project, MIP. This is a statement on their behalf. One thing that most of us have in common is that we would like a safe, warm place to call home that is in our price range. Home is a place to sleep, unwind, recharge, and a home base that we live our lives from. Our community will be strongest if each of our residents has a place to call home that they can afford. As we know, we are facing a housing crunch in Keene. Today, on Indeed.com, there are 1,201 jobs available in Keene. Apartments.com, an expansive database, has only 33 apartments open. This is a huge disparity. Another statistic may have
many of us have heard is that Cheshire County currently has a 0.6% vacancy rate. A healthy rate is 3%. For us to thrive economically as a community, as families and people, we need enough housing. At MIP, we are grateful that the city continues to put forward smart zoning changes in all of our districts. We need to be intentional about zoning that will allow for thoughtful development. We also recognize that historically, 2 acres was the lot size for rural district of Keene until it was changed to 5 acres a few decades ago. Tonight, we'd like to share that we support the proposed minimum lot size change from 5 acres to 2 acres in the rural district. We are grateful to hear and wish to encourage you to prioritize concentrating development to maximize affordable housing and to protect our environment and open space natural areas. That's an awkward sentence. We mean development that's sort of pushed together, concentrated. We all need housing, young adults, seniors, families, daycare workers, school teachers, small business owners, all of the community. We appreciate the City of Keene's efforts and encourage you to support this proposed change. Thank you. Now, as a personal note,
You have 30 seconds, Pamela.
our family has been there, done this with all these land things. I used to live in Marlborough up near the mountain, and I will save all my questions and comments. Maybe I'll give them to Mike Giacomo or Ken here. I got so many questions about septics and current use, and if a family has timber, they don't have to pay that until they cut the timber and sell it. So having to pay for something that's the potential of your land is a little scary. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else wishing to speak tonight? Yes, come forward.
Tad Lacey, Daniels Hill Road. There's so many pieces to this. I haven't got an organized speech, but I do have a couple reactions, so it's going to be a little disparate, but here we go. Of the statement here and what you have on the agenda basically says of 1,121 parcels in the district, almost 80% would not see their taxes affected. This is in the district. The inverse of that is that 20% would. That's a lot of people. And it's sort of getting to the point that I brought up in August, that there is a tier of people that have and it was covered here. I think that was a really good presentation, but I think there are a tier of people that are really going to take it on the chin. And some of these folks, and in fact, there will be circumstances where folks' taxes will go up $1,000. It won't be the hundreds of dollars that we're talking about. These folks are going to have to talk to their lenders. They may have taxes in have to have escrowed with their mortgage people. They're going to have to deal with them. They may be up against it. And so I think that you could be causing some folks some personal damage. I'll have to call it damage and some hardships. The other thing is I don't agree that there's no land. The other thing about, this is on the low side, only 80%, only 20% would be affected. Most of the land that is potentially available for people to build on is in current use. And that's where this disparity is, and that's where the unfairness is, that there's just a tier that is going to be paying the burden, and there are so many landowners with properties in current use, and that's not going anywhere. This is a statewide program that's been here since 1973, that there isn't a lack of land. It's getting incentives to folks who own it to actually make it available.
30 seconds left, Ted.
Now, that's all I have to say. There is no shortage of land. People have been screaming there's been no shortage of land since the 1970s, yet during this whole time period, we've had tons of development in Keene, and there is not a shortage of land now. And if anybody wants, I don't want to talk about properties publicly, but if anybody wants to call me, I will be glad to discuss why I'm saying what I'm saying. So, thank you.
Do we have anyone else? Yes. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Hi, Laura Tobin. I live on Center Street. So I think that change is always scary. I also see when I hear people talk about where taxes are going, a lot about what I've learned about where taxes are. When people say they're worried about paying taxes, I hear a lot about where taxes are going. And I think I've mentioned this before, but when I asked the human resources here, or sorry, Health and Human Services, what their budget was annually, they said that they don't have one. They just basically bill whatever it takes when they have to house people, which means that the more people that are struggling with housing, the higher taxes will go. I've also done some research. I think this was the Southwestern Regional Planning Commission. They had referred me to this report that basically talked about the impact of roads and the cost of roads and maintaining roads. So the more you spread out, the greater the cost of roads and maintaining them and having to redo them, which means that the more people you have commuting into the city, the more those roads will need to be maintained, and the fewer people who live locally the fewer people are paying into that. The people that are not able to afford our people to live here, they're oftentimes the younger generation that they don't feel tied to the area, so they're ready to move out. And these are the people who might be nurses, childcare workers, who kind of make it possible to make to make other people work. If you are at all concerned, if you go out to eat, if you are wondering who is serving you, if you look at the demographic, now restaurants are needing to close or limit their hours. So all of the things that make the downtown area flourish, those are all being impacted. And I do understand that there is a concern about the environment. I'll also say that the people that we're talking about, a lot of times, they are passionate about the environment. They are the people who are starting.
30 seconds, Laura.
Sure, thanks. Composting initiatives and solar energy initiatives, biking to work. They don't want a car. So I think that talking about enabling these people to live in this community and support what we have created, I think is important. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yes.
Good evening, Derek Scalia, 16 Hillside Ave, Keene. Thank you again for taking time to hear comments from the public on this matter. I come to you today as a member of MIP and as a community member, and I've been here in prior months sharing my thoughts, so I'll keep my remarks brief. I come to you today in support of these changes in the acreage of the rural district. As I was reviewing testimonies from prior hearings, I was struck by a few things that I just want to highlight. One, in my findings, this is not something new to the city. The minimum lot size for parcels in the rural district had been 2 acres prior to the change to 5 acreage in 1977. Interesting enough, this was done to reduce Keene's population growth. Keene's population grew by 12% between the years of 1950 and 1960, and then 16% from 1960 to 1970. After the lot size reduction took effect, Keene's population growth fell to 4% between 70 and 80, and further to 2% in the 2000s. Tides are now changing, and the need for housing is increasing. And according to New Hampshire's Business Review in 2021, New Hampshire saw a 0.9% vacancy rate. As of last year, that has fallen to a 0.5%. We saw that in the presentation tonight. This is a growing issue. This is all well below a healthy standard of 5%. As the results of this imbalanced market, we see housing costs skyrocketing. Our housing crisis now runs the economic spectrum. Although much testimony has been given over the past few months about impacting those on the lowest economic spectrum there, this now crosses all wage earners. Housing crisis is through the roof. It is a huge issue. We get it. And we know that no one solution is going to solve this. But this change can make a difference for some. It can open up a doorway to create more possibilities for our city. We have an obligation as communities to confront issues head on with creativity and with resolve. Doing nothing will only further exacerbate this issue. I thank you sincerely for all of your hard work on this issue. I know it's not easy. Thank you for serving our community.
Thank you for your comments tonight. Yes, sir.
Good evening, I'm Nathaniel Stout, 446 Hurricane Road. I just have a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, not once tonight, not the entire night, has the term come up, master plan. Nobody has said one word about a project that we spent multiple years on, that we included thousands and thousands of people with. I haven't heard a word about it. So I don't, I wish we weren't so callous about moving ahead with these momentous things. Now, the other thing is that I happen to own, my wife and I, Sharon and I, own 7.5 acres, 7.3 acres, right in the sweet spot. I'm not worried about that, okay? I don't disagree about the need for housing, but not once tonight has anybody said anything about demographics. What do demographics do? What's going to happen in 4 and 6 years from now and in 10 years from now? Are we going to sacrifice radically rural because of a trend? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir.
Hello, Paul Roth. I'm a resident of Dublin, 116 Monument Road. I'm here representing Cheshire Medical Center. I'll just refer the committee to Don Caruso's letter of November 4th, 2022. I really appreciate all your hard work. It's really reassuring that you've taken this really to heart, and I think Cheshire is in favor of this, but this is a part of a problem that's huge. This is a part of it, and going forward, I think this is going to be a part of the solution. So economically, I think it's a positive thing. The hospital needs to grow to take care of its community. This is an element of the growth of the community. So I think if this moves forward, it'll help Cheshire to serve the community. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
Walter Lacey, Daniel Road. Interesting that this last gentleman raised an issue that I sent Don Caruso a letter about a couple months ago, because he had sent you a letter supporting efforts to change the zoning because of his lack of ability to find housing for his workforce. I asked him how much of the 50-acre site, 50 acres on Maple Avenue, was going to be devoted to housing. And here they have the opportunity to be part of the solution. This gentleman didn't explain how they were going to be part of the solution, but they have an opportunity to do that. And yeah, the other, so I think that they're on the spot as one of the three major employers in Keene. They are. They have the opportunity to lead the way. The other different issue is, I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about conservation easements. Conservation easement benefits the community, not necessarily the individual who's donating it, selling it. It was presented as the planning director that, well, you have a conservation easement so you can protect your land. Well, why would you want to protect your land to make a park for people surrounding it on 2-acre sites? I don't think you would. I think you'd probably hop on the bandwagon and develop that land, make a buck, and like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else? Yes.
Good evening, council, or board. My name is Cole Mills. I'm with 68 Langley Road. And I think you got a runaround from Ms. Bruner and Jesse Rounds. Just to do quick numbers, 219 properties times 1,500 per increase. Just assume each one qualifies for a split. Ends up being about $340,000. That's at the high end without going into any deep analysis on whether there's wetlands, not wetlands. This is just if you assume everything 5 acres or less can be split into two, or 5 acres and, or I'm sorry, 9 and 5 could be split. Or rather, anyway, going from 5 to 2 acre minimum zoning in a rural district does not have the impact of providing affordable housing. Rather, it will destroy a part of what makes Keene a special and diverse community. By reducing 2 acre zonings, 20 acre lot where 10 houses, 2 acre zoning will allow 10 houses to be built now where only 4 could be built under the 5 acre zoning. With the addition of ADUs as a matter of right, 10 homes becomes 20 residential units. So you can pack it out fairly quickly. By reducing the minimum zoning with the CRD modifications, you put tremendous stress on part of the cities that is not served by public water, sewer, lack sidewalks, have narrow scenic roads, and are the furthest from police, fire, EMT, public transportation services. There's also environmental and noise impacts to consider as you've increased traffic and activity in these quiet neighborhoods. 2 acre zoning does nothing to solve the housing shortage. Cost of land isn't a problem. It costs to build, drill, and drill a well and dig a septic. Recently built homes on less than 5 acres have sold between $400,000 and $550,000. Current things that do not make Keene affordable are the cost to build, the interest rates, which are now between 6 and 7% for a 30-year mortgage, and Keene property taxes, which still, even at 31.3, continue to be one of the highest in the state. The idea that Keene is short 1,400 homes, including in that number 300 more expensive homes, is unsupported. For the past 30 years, our population has stayed between 22 and 23,000 folks. During that time, we've had substantial housing come online. Privately owned college dormitories, senior housing, conversion of several industrial and public buildings to apartments, to name a few projects. During that time, Keene State College has dropped from about 5,500 students to 3,000 students. This has opened up housing in the center of the city that was once rented by students. It doesn't also consider projects that have been improved, like Whitcomb's Mill or 310 Marlborough Street. In other words, we have more homes now than the history of this community, but yet we've had flat population growth for
30
over
seconds,
30 years. Thank you. Also, too, what I want to point in is that the Cheshire Medical, the reason they can't hire people is very simply because there's a huge shortage. 200,000 nurses per year need to be just to maintain the status quo. Doctors, you can't do it. As Councilor Giacomo once said, I'm the only chemical engineer in town. If I don't like my company, I don't like my job, I got to move out. And knowing that,
if you finish up your thoughts.
Yeah, okay. No, knowing that, and being in the same position, People aren't gonna move to a community where they've got one job opportunity. They're gonna stay in areas where there's more availability than just the one hospital. Also, too, the 45, and I'll just finish on this, the 4,500 households in need of upgraded housing, considering there's only 92 households total. Sounds like we should bulldoze the town, because 45% of our
That's enough.
houses are horrible.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I do want to make a comment to you, Mr. Mills. Your comment about Mary Bruner, I'm going to totally ignore. I don't feel that I'm getting the runaround. I'm speaking for myself. I think that's an unnecessary comment, but thank you for providing us with all of your information.
I appreciate it so much, Ms. Slack, and I really do appreciate all the help that you've done. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Do we have anyone else who would like to speak to us this evening?
Can you speak twice?
No, I think we're going to keep it to one time tonight. Yes, just a second, Counselor.
But anyhow, I want to remind you that our chairperson told us nobody's being forced to do this. Nobody. She said there's no way we can do that. Those were her words. So I don't think, I hear a lot of, I don't like the word negative because I appreciate where you folks are coming from. However, nobody's twisting your arm and saying this is what you have to do. And a committee such as this committee, before all of us came in, they've been doing this for a long time. They've been working hard. So I just want to remind you that your city is working for you as best as we can. I just had to say that. That's the mother in me. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Johnson. All right, so do we have anyone else from the public before I close the public workshop? All right, the public workshop for tonight is closed. This is an opportunity now for our committee to speak to each other about what we think is the next steps for this ordinance. Do we have anyone who wants to get us started? Yes, Councilor Ormerod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a man who found a young boy near the seashore where there were millions of stranded starfish that would die if they weren't put back into the ocean. But it was going to be several hours until the tide was near. So he was picking them up one by one and throwing them back into the ocean. Now the man told him, he said, "What are you doing that for? You're not really going to make a difference." And that boy said, "It makes a difference to the starfish." This is what we know. The rural zone is underdensified. Even the undeveloped lots, if we're going to count that, would be worth it. Worth it to get us towards 140 per year household with income diversity, which our new CRD regulations have helped enable. And we're in crisis. We got to get moving towards the 5% rental vacancy rate. We're in crisis. We heard that. Even the data we see, we know that. And in particular, we need housing units to accommodate families and raise our 2.2 person household size to something more normal. That's what we need. We saw the data. We need families. We need young people moving in. We need larger households. We need larger places for them to live. I am supporting this, the motion to bring this in here and in council to reduce the minimum lot size from 5 to 2.
Thank you, Councilor Ormerod. So just so the committee is aware tonight, we've got a couple of options on the table as we discuss this. As with the normal joint committee meetings, at the end of the meeting, if we want this to move forward, the Planning, Licenses, and Development Committee would be looking to set a public hearing, which would be the next step for the public to continue participation. But at that point, it would be in front of the full council. And we heard a gentleman speak about the master plan. This would be the planning board's opportunity to weigh in on how you feel this ordinance aligns with the master plan. So if we wanted to move forward, our other options would be to continue the workshop or to amend this ordinance if there was anything in there that you heard or that you think might need some massaging before it should go forward to full council again. So I just want to be clear for the public what the next steps are and for us as we start talking. I think for me personally, I have sat before all of you and the public, and we've spoken about this several times. I have personally been in a situation where I see every day on a day-to-day basis what the housing constraints in our community are doing from an employment, as an employer and as a homeowner who couldn't afford the home that I live in now because of the supply and demand issues in our community. And I think that we need to look at each of these zones, and not just the rural zone, but each of these zones and each opportunity that we can to start creating opportunity for more units to become available in our community. I've been working with the Community Development Department about potential new ordinance for ADUs, and we've looked at other zones, and the medium density and the high density zones, they're gonna get their review as well. I've started to speak at council a lot about our parking requirements downtown and how restrictive they are with our parking bans, and how that might open up additional opportunities for densification downtown if we had more ability for parking. And I think you're gonna see all of these things in the coming year get deliberated, because we have to look at, I think our housing analysis said there's no silver bullet. So we are going to have to look at little things that we can do to affect the community. And there are lots of people, we're not just talking about low-income folks, but there are lots of people who want single-family homes, who want to raise their families, and we need to be looking at what opportunities we can create for them as well. So that's my position on it. Councilor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My biggest concern going into this really had to do with the financial aspects. I do appreciate all Dan's information that he had to share tonight. First off, the number of total households, 219 households, represents somewhere around less than 2%, roughly 2% of our total households in the city of Keene. So we're talking, there are potential, 2% have a potential to have an increase in taxes. So I know 219 sounds like a large number, and it is a large number, and to Raleigh's point, it's large, it's to those 219, it is absolutely significant. That is parcels, though. So the number of vacant ones will certainly factor into that. We don't know how many of those are actually vacant already. And again, that's 2% of the households in Keene actually have, sorry, parcels, I keep saying households. Parcels have a potential to even have the taxes increase, assuming that they're actually buildable for an additional lot on there. So again, it put things in perspective a little bit, and having really the confirmation that yes, you can also go back and request an abatement on this. You can, if you honestly don't think that your property is buildable, and you can show that it's not buildable, absolutely it won't impact you. And otherwise, the value is going up, which is a bad thing if you're not selling. If it's a good thing if you are. I mean, it all kind of, it is what it is, and the state law mandates that we have to assess the fair value of it. So I guess what I keep looking at is if we switch from 5 to 2, and that's the tax impact, the potential tax impact, it's not as big as I expected it to be, honestly, from a number of households. And that was really my biggest concern here. I appreciate Matthew Hall's letter here about potentially a compromise solution here of looking at 3 acres, or 4 acres instead of 2. I would certainly be open to 3 or 4 acres as well. That would reduce it from 4 to 10 being the range that we'd have to look at potential change to 6 to 10, or from 8 to 10. So I would certainly be open to that. But again, the financial side, I had a lot of my fears kind of calmed down tonight about that. That was my biggest issue.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Emily?
Yeah, I was gonna follow up from you, Mike, just what you just brought up about Matt's letter, 5 to 2, and you know, whether or not it could be 5 to 3 instead. I wondered if maybe the city could provide any clarity as far as, I mean, data-wise and like from the past, it was 2, maybe a little more explanation about why it's not proposed to be 3 or why it is 2.
Yep, so when we were looking at the data, the reason why we had initially proposed going down to 2 acres is because that's what it was historically. So what we did initially is we, just kind of as a good practice, you want there to not be a lot of non-conforming parcels or properties in a zoning district, because having a non-conforming lot can create hardships for the owners. And so when we were starting out on this, before we came up with any solution, we just looked at the data and we were like, okay, what are the different parcel size breakdowns? And we were pretty shocked at such a high number of non-conforming lots in the rural district. And we keep throwing out there that 58% of the lots are less than 5 acres today. Over a third of them are less than 2 acres. So we felt that the 2 acres made sense for historical reasons, and also we felt that going below 2 acres was too far. But given the fact that the lot size in the rural district was historically 2 acres, we wanted to get the number of non-conforming lots down as much as possible. You know, there's still gonna be around 35% will still be non-conforming with respect to lot size, even if it changes to 2 acres. And that's, you know, it is what it is. But at least this would be reducing that. I will mention also that part of the reason why that historical development pattern, before the lot size was changed to 2 acres, I think it was around 1960 is when it was changed to 2 acres. Before that, the lot size in the rural district, which was at the time called the agricultural district, was actually only 1 acre. So for a really long time in Keene, it was 1 acre zoning in that district, then it went up to 2 acre zoning. And then because of this really high population growth and a lot of pressure that it was putting on the city services that were getting overwhelmed, it was moved up to 5 acres specifically to stop growth. So we're just trying to undo that action because we now have ample city services available. We have a new wastewater treatment plant. We have plenty of fire and police. Our school district is trying to find more people because they're under, they're not full. They have a lot of space left for students. So I hope that answers your question. We didn't specifically do the analysis for if it were 3 acres, but we could certainly do that for you.
Okay,
Thank you. Shorter answer.
And then just a follow-up, another
Yes.
like piggyback
Sure,
on
go
Mike,
ahead.
as far as the 2%. Thanks for the math, Mike, on that. But as far as 2% of potential people being affected tax-wise, and then the people that could potentially be positively affected, kind of those scales for me are tipping as far as the potential, and then the potential of people that their tax rates could go up. And I'm like, I feel the comments. I do feel all of them. And you're so valid in what you're saying. And I take it all in. But there is that potential. And then, yeah, I think it's an opening a door to a solution.
Great. Anyone else? Yes, Ken.
Now I think we have a quorum, but I did want to, there was a lot of compelling there was a lot of compelling discussion, and I think the last thing that Mary just mentioned really resonates, and that all of this is a little bit of public policy, and that we use zoning and land use and changes to make certain things happen or try to accommodate certain things. And so in the past, we were growing too much, and then we wanted to slow it down, and so that's what happened at the time. But that was then. Nothing stays the same, and now we have the opposite problem where we're not growing, and we're not growing because, well, one reason is there's no place to live, and so we do have to adjust our public policy. And that's what this is about at the highest level, and I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. There's a lot of details everyone discussed, but I think the idea that at one point we were growing too rapidly and our public systems and infrastructure couldn't support the growth, and now we have adequate infrastructure and public systems so we can support the growth, and we want to bring some people here and accommodate that housing. And so I think that's just a very important thing to keep in mind when you
Thank
think
you.
about this. Thank you.
Pam?
I just want to remind the planning board that the position that we vote on tonight is about the ordinance and whether it is consistent with the comprehensive master plan, which former Councilor Stout brought up when he came up here to speak. So that is what we will be voting on. That's our decision tonight. And Mary, I don't know if maybe you could speak to a couple of things about how this ordinance does fit into the master plan, the comprehensive master plan.
Off the top of my head, I don't have the master plan memorized, but I do know that the master plan talks about housing affordability. It talks about the need for housing in general. It does also talk a lot about open space and the importance of open space in protecting environmentally sensitive areas. I think we discussed this, and I take Mr. Stout's point, staff probably could have been much more direct in talking about the master plan, and I think part of the reason why we didn't is because of the history of the previous ordinance where we discussed this and mentioned the master plan at length. I don't know if Mr. Rounds, if you would like to.
The only comment I want to make, which is what I brought up quite some time ago at the planning board, and the fact that the comprehensive master plan that we're following right now is a bit outdated, and it does need to be updated because it really does not address the housing crisis that we're going through now, and I know that's on the agenda at some point, but I did want to bring that up. So we're kind of just following what's in the comprehensive plan right now, the master plan, but I really think at some point, and we all know this, we've talked about it, Council Bosley and I have also spoken about it, that it does need to be updated to address today's issues.
I'll just add, hopefully that's coming soon. We're planning to make that update in the coming years. And I apologize for leaving out the master plan. I definitely, as Mary noted, we've talked about this so much that I think I focused on the comments instead of the history. And so I do want to remind everyone that when Mary did the great work of taking this through the first time, we talked quite extensively about the master plan and how this fit into that. So my apologies.
No need to apologize, really. And I just have one other comment. I want to read the notes from, the Mayor Hansel isn't here tonight, so I don't know what he was going to say, but I think it's important to tell you what he said in January about this ordinance. He stated that he was on the statewide Housing Stability Council, which kicked off the localization of the housing discussion, and at that time, the state was short approximately 20,000 units at that time. This was prior to COVID, and since then, the number has increased dramatically. The mayor stated he feels bad that the staff has to defend bringing this issue forward as it is, we've all learned, a very controversial topic. He felt that this item, this particular ordinance, needs to be brought before the council to be voted up or down. And he hoped that staff would continue to give the community the opportunity to see if it wants to handle this housing crisis. And I think that's very important because that still stands this month.
Great, thank you, Pam. Anyone else have any questions or comments before we get to whether we want to hear a motion for vote? All right, I'm not seeing any. Do you want to start?
Sure. So, the motion for the planning board is to vote on the ordinance as it is, and that it is consistent with the comprehensive master plan.
Do we have a motion and a second?
Is there a motion?
I'd like to make the motion that the wording of the proposed change is consistent with the comprehensive master plan.
Is there a second? Does anyone have any questions? All in favor? Mr. Koss, you can still vote. Thank you.
That's unanimous. All right, and do we have a motion on the PLD side?
Move to set a public hearing?
Do I have a second? Motion by Counselor Giacomo, second by Counselor Ormerod. Any questions? Counselor Jones?
Yes, on the motion is only to ask the mayor to set a public hearing, which the petitioner is entitled to anyway, so it's kind of a silly vote, so.
But we do it at every joint committee.
And I say this all the time, but yes, I wanted to have a public hearing. I still don't agree with the ordinance, but I think it should move on to a public hearing, so I'll be voting yes.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. All in favor? And that is also unanimous. So this item, the way it stands, will move forward to council for a public hearing. And you will all have an opportunity to speak before the full council again. After the public hearing, it will have an opportunity to go back before the PLD committee to just have one final review before it goes back to council for a vote. And I hope to see all of you there. Let's see, moving on tonight. Do we have any new business? No new business? So our next meeting is Monday, April 10th. It looks like we will probably be having another report out from Camoin about the housing need analysis. So that is going to be an interesting meeting to attend as well for everyone. And it'll be 6:30 here in council chambers. And at this time,
I just want to say, this is my last joint
Yes.
meeting. I will be going off the planning board at the end of March.
And thank you, Pam, for being such a lovely co-chair for the last couple of years.
I enjoyed having you as a co-chair. It's been wonderful. So I don't know if everyone on the planning board knows, but I will be leaving the board at the end of March. And you will be voting in a new chair. So my time serving on the planning board and the PLD committee will come to an end for you this month and for the planning board at the end of the month.
Well, we really appreciate all of the years that you have put in. I know there's been quite a few, and I'm sure that this will not be your last involvement here in these chambers. So I think we've gone, Counselor Jones, yes.
Can I, under new business, can you just let the committee know that there is an ordinance that the council asked to come back to this committee?
We haven't asked yet. We will be asking Thursday night. So.
Oh, that's right, it was done at committee, and that wasn't done at the full council. Never mind.
That's right.
I
So
stand corrected.
we did meet about an ordinance at the Planning Licenses and Development Committee last Wednesday, and we're recommending that council send it back to the joint committee, but we have to wait till Thursday to see what happens. So that's potential new business coming up.
New stuff.
Anything else before we adjourn? All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming this evening, and we're adjourned.
I wasn't gonna say anything about